Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. I'm just gonna test a few things here.
Okay, great.
Give me a second. I'm gonna get my slides uploaded as well. If you can, I'll just share a screen here. If you can share screen, I'll get these open right now.
Yep, you should be all set to go.
Yep. Give me 1 second. Here we go. How's your morning going?
It's going pretty well. How about yourself?
Good, good. Just took in the opening speeches and it's good. Enjoyed it. Just give me 1 second.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that this is happening in a virtual format. That's great.
Good. There we go. I'm assuming you can see everything there, nice and clear.
Yes, it looks great.
Good. Just gonna adjust a few things. I like my Wolfpack mural. When I saw this, I said, I got to use that one. I have to use it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've been using it in all my Zoom meetings. So it's been, I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. It's great. I've been using that one a lot too. It's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. Well, thank the university for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
So I see a few coming in through the waiting room, but I will leave the waiting room enabled until
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great.
And Ashley will probably be joining us soon. I know she'll be.
Okay. And where can I mic down and where can I camera down if I need to? Do I have those rights for my end?
Yeah, since you're sharing your screen, if you go to the top of your screen,
oh, there we go.
you'll be able
Yeah,
to see
got
the
it.
Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
It switches it on you when you share your screen.
Oh yeah, better go back here. Leave it here. Just went through my. Yeah, okay. Oops. Let's go back to that. There we go. Okay. Good. So there's my. Good. And I spoke to Holly the other day, and we're going to have Frank Fossen's going to start, go first right after me.
Okay.
And then we'll follow the same sequence after that with after Frank with the sequence that we have scheduled.
Wonderful. Sounds great.
Yeah, and I will do my best to keep the speakers on time, and I will also introduce each speaker.
That sounds wonderful.
Sure.
Good morning, Gal.
Hey, Holly, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good.
Gal, have you met Michelle? Michelle is going to be our
Yeah,
support.
had a chance to talk. Right. There we go. Good.
Oh, and you guys already sorted through the slides. Perfect.
It looks great.
Awesome.
Good morning, Frank. Oh, he's just connecting.
Cal, I was thinking that what we could do, and I don't know if you and Michelle talked about this, but we could just leave your slide up. So it's going to be
yeah, we'll leave it right there as they walk through the door, and I'll get started, and Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. So I had actually talked with you. I thought this was a webinar format Zoom. It's actually a meeting format. So people will be on, they'll be able to show their faces. I mean, as long as you're sharing your screen, obviously, with any of the speakers, that'll be the main screen for everyone. And I have it set so that no one can unmute themselves or anything.
Okay.
There's no worry of that background chatter or things like that.
Oh,
But
good.
so
Great.
what will happen is we're going to mass admit everybody into from the waiting room in at 9 o'clock. And then I'll let you know I'm going to hit the button, and then I'd give it maybe, 30 seconds to a minute. Michelle has it usually about a minute. Michelle has taught me, we wait for the numbers to kind of seem like they're not really steadily increasing. They kind of, taper out at like whatever the number is we're expecting, and then go ahead and get started.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Frank, can you hear us?
He might not be. Oh, cool.
Hello.
Hey, good. How are you? Good.
Good. How are
Frank,
you?
yeah, I let Holly and Michelle know that you'll be presenting first, and then hello, Agnieszka. How are you? Oh, your microphone is off.
Yeah. Okay. Hi.
Oh, good. How are you?
Hi.
Good.
Nice to see you. How are
Yeah,
you?
nice to see you again. Nice to see you. And you'll be presenting, Agnieszka. We'll be presenting in sequence, and Frank will go first, Frank Fossen, and then you'll be in the second presenting sequence, and we'll follow that same sequence.
I am the second. Yes, because I think
second. Correct.
okay, because
yes,
I think that according to the schedule was that I was supposed. Okay, but it's better. It's better to be second. Yeah,
Correct.
I
And
always.
yeah, we had one change. There was
Okay.
one presenter that wasn't able to be with us today to make the presentation, so we had to just make a slight change. Thanks.
No problem. Yeah. Are we supposed to make some trial? I mean, whether as to uploading the presentation or to the screen or no? Because I was in it. It was the suggestion was in message from Mehmet Tonsul, yes, from Professor Tonsul, that we will make some trials, or do we do it, or we are just waiting?
I would love it personally if everyone wanted to just pop up their slides and just double check that it can. Hi, everyone. I'm Holly. I'm going to help be a background moderator, myself and Michelle Revelati. I'd love if everyone could just pop up their slides just to check and make sure we won't have any sharing issues just in this 10 minutes beforehand.
Okay. Do you want me to stop share, Holly?
Yes, please, Cal.
There we go.
Perfect. I don't know if whoever wants to pop theirs up next. We have one more speaker coming this morning, right?
Two more.
Okay, can I share?
Yeah. Mark Packard should be joining us as well.
Oh, perfect.
Can I share my screen?
Yep, please do.
Yeah. Whether it works. Share screen. Screen here. Do you see it?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, so now I don't know how to stop share. Okay.
Well, actually, we see your Microsoft Teams
Yeah.
in the browser. Is that what we're
Okay.
supposed to see? Okay, just checking.
Okay, cool. So stop share because because we usually we are usually using Teams. Yeah, that is why I know very well how it works, and very rarely the Zoom. But okay, right. It's very easy in fact.
Perfect. Awesome. Frank, do you have any slides you were planning on sharing?
Yes, I do.
Perfect.
Sometime.
So can you see my title slide?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
This billion paycheck protection program.
Correct.
Who's our other presenter? Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us. Mark, we're just doing test runs of our slides. If you want to just pop yours up on the computer, just make sure we're not going to have any issues with it. Looks great. Yeah, perfect. Mm, Marta, there we go. Our last speaker is joining us now.
Oh, there we go. Good, thanks. Hey, Mark. There's Marta. Hi, Marta.
Lee, would you be able to make all of the speakers co-hosts?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again so we can just be ready to go.
Yes. Hi, Cal. This is Mehmet. I need to go to the other session, but I just want to say hi and thank you for doing this.
You got it.
Yeah. So great to see you, and this is a wonderful session too. I wish I could be there.
Thanks, Mehmet.
I'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye, Mehmet. All right, I think that's everybody. Marta, did you have any slides you were planning on sharing?
Yeah, we have, but
just-
actually I'm with Rafał and Albert, and I think they will be joining us in a minute. I hope so, because we are like three of us. We are presenting. So.
Oh, okay, perfect. So
Yeah.
I'm just keeping an eye on the waiting room. So they were not initially on my list, which is no problem at all. So I'm looking for someone named, what are their names?
It's Rafał Kasprzak and Albert Tomaszewski.
Oh, perfect. They are both in the waiting room now. I will let them in
Okay, perfect.
now.
Thank you.
And then, oh, of course, no problem. So yeah, so they'll all be there as speakers.
And Albert will be sharing our presentation. So
Okay.
Albert Tomaszewski. Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Hello. How are
Hi,
you?
Albert. How are you?
Hello.
Hi, Albert.
Okay, perfect. Albert, do you have slides you all three wanted to share? And would you like to pop them up on the screen real quick, just as a test? I'm sorry, Cal, I know you just put yours back up. Can I ask you to stop sharing?
Okay. Yeah, I have it somewhere here. Give me a second.
There we go.
Let me see. Share your screen. Okay. Does it work?
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
I can see
It's
it.
great.
it's okay. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna stop.
Oh, perfect. I'm loving it. Okay, so everyone's slides works. That's
Good. I'll
good.
put mine back
Oh,
up.
sorry, Cal, I just saw you that you were muted.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
With everyone set as co-hosts, they'll be able to unmute themselves.
Yes, you all should have co-host permissions now. Is there anything I'm missing, Michelle? Everyone's slides are working, everyone's co-host. I've got the participants can't unmute themselves. Anything else?
That it's great. So how we have it set up right now is so that, and all of the participants that will be joining us, not our presenters, will not be able to unmute themselves for the beginning part so that you can go through your presentation without having dog barks in the background and everything else. But if you want to open it up for questions, we can change that right away. But we figured that way you can focus on your presentations and you will be able to unmute yourselves and share your screens, but it keeps it a little bit more contained.
Yeah, so Cal, I'll just wait for a cue from you towards the end. Once everyone's kind of wrapped up and I'm hearing it, if you'll be the one, since you're our session host, kind of guiding the in between speakers and at the end, and then I'll just wait
introduce
for
it.
that cue and I'll let people unmute themselves.
Yeah. As soon as I'm finished with my presentation, I'll stop share and then I'll introduce Frank as our first speaker, and then we'll follow our sequence. Great.
Perfect. Excellent. And then you'll close us out. Is that right, Cal? Just let people know we're heading to a break and the next session starts at 11.
Yes, I'll do that at the very end. Once our last speaker, will open up for questions, and then I'll let them know we'll be moving into a break until 11.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then just to double check, no one else has any other co-hosts or guest speakers that are coming with them that might be in the waiting room? Perfect. Okay, awesome. Just don't want to leave anyone out. So we've got just about 3 minutes until then, and I'll let everyone know once I start letting participants in, and then Cal will start. And if you guys need anything during the session, you can always in the chat feature, private chat myself or Michelle, and we can help you with something.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Albert, is that a virtual background or are you sitting in that very nice room there?
Oh no, that's a virtual background. Yeah. I like the background. I like this mural, so it's
Yeah.
it's quite blue. Lots of wolves though, so which is good. Wolf pack.
Albert, is that a virtual background too?
Yeah, it is. I haven't been in our library for a while.
Yeah, it's closed, is it?
It's, at the moment, I think it's closed. It was open for a couple of months, but yeah, no, everything, pandemics, lockdowns as well.
Mhm.
All right, we're about a minute out. So good luck, everyone. Holly, when you can open up the waiting room or let everybody in as soon as you would like.
Yeah, let me know when they're in. We'll get started.
I'm on mute, so none of you heard that. I'm going to give it one more minute until 9 o'clock on the dot, and then I'll let people filter in.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to hit admit all. And like I said, I give it just a couple minutes till you see, or a couple 10, 20 seconds till you see the numbers, Cal, and participants start kind of tapering. And then go ahead and start. Good luck, everyone.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Cal Joshi. I'd like to welcome our SGH and Warsaw community to our third UNR SGH symposium. I'd like to welcome our UNR community and our broader Nevada community to our session in global entrepreneurship as well. So welcome everyone. I hope all is well and safe amidst this global pandemic. I find the entrepreneurship crowd is quite resilient. We discuss resilience an awful lot in entrepreneurship. So again, I extend my warm welcome and hope everyone is safe and healthy. We'd like to get started. Time is always short, as we know, with in sessions, and I'd like to begin with some opening remarks and then talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, analytics, and data-driven decision-making, albeit on a very brief basis. So again, welcome everyone, and let's get started. I will introduce each speaker in sequence, and I'll also be moderating time. We have time for questions at the very end of the session as well, prior to us wrapping up. And the next session will be at 11 a.m. here Pacific time. So we'll have a short break before the next session begins, just to remind our audience of that. And again, everyone, welcome. Let's begin. So here in the state of Nevada, when we discuss and we address entrepreneurship and global entrepreneurship, here we want to continue to cultivate entrepreneurial ecosystems, including incubation and acceleration. Very important. And also here in the state of Nevada, we also want to continue to provide regulatory and policy-based pathways that promote entrepreneurial ecosystem generation, which also is of paramount importance. And we're doing a really good job with it. We, here in Northern Nevada, we are diversifying economically, especially up here in the northern part of the state. We're doing a lot of wonderful things. Here's some general indicators to share with the audience. You know, whether it's Moody's Analytics, whether it's prior to the pandemic's obviously had its impact with the Milken Institute. Some of you are familiar with the Milken Institute and the data that they generate, and whether it's Inc.com writing article pieces on entrepreneurship here in Reno, Nevada. As you have a brief look at this, I want to highlight, and from my travels to SGH and meeting the faculty and students, wonderful colleagues and administrators there as well, when the entrepreneurship student teams do have the opportunity to come to our campus and our College of Business, and we have the opportunity to guest judge their entrepreneurial student pitch presentations. I've been a part of that. And I have to tell you, I am very impressed with the astuteness and the robustness and the rigor of the student presentations, the SGH student presentations, their entrepreneurial pitch presentations, when we've had the opportunity to, again, sit in as guest judges here in our College of Business up in our boardroom. So I want to really commend the efforts of SGH Warsaw and the entrepreneurship student teams. Look forward to further pitch presentations and guest judging those and offering insight and feedback to you as well. It's a great partnership, and we continue to watch it flourish and grow, and we also find it very enriching. So wonderful work that you're doing over there. Wonderful. Look forward to more of it. Now, entrepreneurship and data-driven decision-making, I just have a few brief comments, a few brief general comments. As we know, in our session in global entrepreneurship, we understand the resiliencies in the field and amongst the global pandemic. We share a common goal. Entrepreneurs share a common goal, and we think transformatively. We create value. We take these ideas, we engage in ideation, and we move into operationalizing this, business modeling, business propositions. And we use data. We need data. We need quality data. We need to amass data. Eventually, we need that data, which is going to lead to insight, which is going to lead to opportunity. And entrepreneurs love opportunity. We love creating value, from ideation to commercialization. So we want to take note, when IBM recently said 90% of the world's amassment of data, generation of data, has taken place in the last few years, there are opportunities abound. Every click, every website visit, every social media like and dislike, every post, our data is getting captured somewhere. It's getting captured somewhere. And for those that have the opportunity to harness it and access it and harness it, this becomes valuable. This becomes valuable insight, valuable information. And I want to emphasize that today for this audience as we look at global entrepreneurship. And the data is now a valuable asset in entrepreneurship. Of course, we seek quality data. We're after quality data. But with these opportunities, and really, you've heard some of these colloquial phrases, data is the new oil. But we want that quality data. That's the oxygen. That's the oxygen of entrepreneurship. But understand data as an asset. And what can we glean from it? Entrepreneurs, what can we glean from the amassment of data and big data sets? It'll come in structured, it'll come in unstructured, it'll come in noisy, it'll come in with garbage. Our job is to, in part, is to try and clean that data, turn it into quality data, and make it presumptive, make it compelling, and turn it into that compelling story. Entrepreneurs, we know in the world of cash burn, funding is of paramount importance, and our funders will have their own data-driven demands to be convinced with data in the story. Do we want validation? Sure, 50% of the top 10 companies are database platforms. 2 examples, Google, Facebook. This indicates how the broader market now views the value of data. And that's very, very important to note that as well. When you think of Amazon, Apple, Google, their entrepreneurial paths weren't by happenstance or on assumption. They harnessed data. They had some deep insights. They had the opportunities for some incredible modeling and optimization, business processes, operational functioning, optimization, as I mentioned, while operating in real-time, globally competitive markets. So there's quite some validation there. Now, the entrepreneurial journey for our global entrepreneurs, and we study global entrepreneurship, and we need quality data. If we look at the bottom of the slide first, and we think of the different phases, whether it's, again, ideation, whether it's opportunity or seeking market opportunity, what is the size of the market? What are we playing in? Is it enough to make money? Is it enough to get the attention of venture capital and funders? When we get to human capital and formation of our teams, when we get to entrepreneurial finance, competitive analyses in the global landscape as well. From quality data, we need to make sure we can answer certain questions. And these questions will be really turn themselves into demands by those who can make it a very important decision per funding. And always be mindful of cash burn. Some great ideas fizzle. They run out of money, they run out of cash, and they can't make it to the next step. They can't make it to the next round. So where does your data come from? What is the source of it? Always be mindful. These are the types of questions that can be asked of you in relation to your idea on your entrepreneurial journey at different steps of that journey. So where does that data come from? What is the source? When did you obtain your data? When? Is it stale? Is it not? Is it primary? When did you obtain it? Is it secondary? What analytics models did you use to analyze the data? And some will engage in predictive modeling at certain times, depending on their data and data sets and the size of those data sets. And there's some sizable big data sets. What doesn't your data tell us? Some may be looking for appearances of bias. How can we leverage your data? What else can we do with it? When you think of the world of customer intelligence and seeking market opportunities, customer intelligence and seeking market opportunities or market opportunity identification, it's not only who the customer is, it's what can we do for the customer? How can we solve pain points? We can start to think generatively. What else can we solve for this customer? What other potential products and or services might these customers demand? As we do our customer intelligence, as we seek to identify the market landscape. And can you connect your data to relatable examples? Depending on the nature of the pitch and the presentation, you might be seeking to relate your data to in time or in size or certain things. So that's what we're getting at here in terms of the entrepreneurial journey, calling for quality data. And are you prepared for preparedness for the demands of these sophisticated funding audience? Now, as we look at entrepreneurship, analytics, and data, I believe it's very, very important that entrepreneurs adopt analytics tools and techniques which can allow them to be better informed per data quality and, very importantly, pattern discovery. Pattern discovery. Be evidential. We need to be evidential at an almost forensic level. As a term that I tend to use from time to time is understanding that data, getting into the quality of that data and understanding it on an almost forensic level. And we want to develop that data-driven mindset and be customer obsessed. Some of you will read Jeff Bezos's annual letters. Here's a phrase, some of you may have heard this before, but being like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, I'll leave that to the audience to decide individual by individual. Entrepreneurs should acquire data visualization and storytelling skills. This is very, very important as well in terms of the entrepreneurial data-based entrepreneurial pitches. But I believe the true unicorn is this. The true unicorn is not just a person who can interpret the data, but it's the person who can interpret and effectively communicate the findings. We use that term unicorn in entrepreneurship, the companies that hit the $1 billion market cap. I think a true unicorn also is that individual who can not only interpret the data, but also effectively communicate that data to those that need that information. Decision makers, for example. Funders, for example. Very, very important. A true asset, value creation. And we seek to create value in entrepreneurship, value creation. Multidisciplinary skill sets, again, amongst our global entrepreneurs, this is of paramount importance. We have to understand many different facets, many different areas, and I've listed some of them here. It's the big picture, it's the bigger framework, and now that we're working and operating with big data, and we're using, applying, adopting analytics very, very frequently, get educated, be a lifelong learner, be a lifelong student. Data equals insight equals opportunity. And in this crowd amongst us in global entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs seek opportunity. Entrepreneurs seek opportunity. Thank you very much. That's my short opening into the session. And I will hand this over to Mr. Frank Fossen. Frank will be starting, and Frank will, as you load your slides here, I don't have to read the title of your paper presentation because it's right there. I'm going to hand it to you for the sake of time. Welcome, Frank.
Thank you, Cal. So I'm happy to present at this workshop. It's great to see all of you again after having met you in person in Reno and also in Warsaw. So I'm going to present research about the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. These are the two biggest programs of the federal government to support small businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. And specifically, we are asking whether these funds flowed to minority communities and minority business owners, so non-white and Latino or Latina business owners. This is joint work with Robert Fairley at the University of California in Santa Cruz. So, as you all know, and the situation is similar in Poland as in the United States, during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, many businesses had to close by policy mandate, health concerns, or downward demand shifts. So in March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, and then it all happened quickly. By April 2020, most US states imposed social distancing restrictions. So a lot of small businesses closed, shut down during that time. My co-author, Rob Fairley, has a different paper where he showed that the number of active business owners dropped by 22% between February and April 2020. So in 2 months of time. Minority business owners were much harder hit. The number of African American business owners dropped by 41% during that time, and the number of Latino and Latina business owners dropped by 32%. So we're focusing on these minority businesses. Also, this is happening at a time in the United States of nationwide protests over police brutality, racial injustice, and racial discrimination. There has developed an increased awareness of racial inequality, which motivates this focus. So to give a little bit background on these programs, they may be less known in Poland. So the Paycheck Protection Program is the biggest federal program to support small businesses in an unprecedented amount. So 650 billion US dollars were handed out in the first 2 rounds of the Paycheck Protection Program in 2020. So this is in the ballpark of Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security. These are loans provided to small businesses through banks, credit unions, and other financial institutions to keep them open, and really with the goal to retain employees on the payroll. Importantly, these loans can be converted to grants, so they can be forgiven if these loans are used primarily to pay payroll. So if employees are kept in the business, then these loans do not need to be repaid. So this is substantial support and also, of course, very expensive for the government. The first 2 rounds ran from April 3rd, 2020 to August 8th, 2020, and provided more than 5 million loans. And this goes through the largest banks in bank chains in the United States, like Bank of America, but also fintech were involved, like Cabbage, for example. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program is slightly less well known, but it's also very large. It has been expanded during COVID-19 to support businesses losing revenues and sales. Nearly 3.6 idle loans for 200 billion US dollars and nearly 5.8 million idle advances for 20 billion were handed out between April and August 2020. Idle loans can be used to cover up to 6 months of a wide array of working capital and normal operating expenses. So this is not limited to payroll, different from the PPP program. So these are idle loans. In contrast, idle advances are grants. They do not need to be repaid, but they are for small amounts, $1,000 per employee, up to a maximum of $10,000. Importantly, the Congress, when they passed the bill, so the first 2 rounds were in the context of the CARES Act. And this CARES Act states explicitly that one goal was to prioritize underserved markets and businesses owned by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So it's straightforward to ask in how far these funds reached minority communities. This is an important question because, as I showed on the first slide, minority business owners are hit much harder than non-minority business owners. And also because it's not only about the minority business owners, but minority business owners tend to employ minority employees as well. So this supports minority communities in a wider sense. We obtained the universe of loan level microdata, both on the PPP and idle, for the first 2 rounds in 2020. So we have all the loans. These loans, unfortunately, don't have much information on race and gender. So there's a field, but it was voluntary for the banks to fill that in. And only 10% of the banks filled in race and gender. And this is, of course, not random, so it's useless. So instead of analyzing that, we merge the loan level data to zip code level, postal code level data from different data sources. Most importantly, to match this to minority shares. So the county business patterns gives us the number of business establishments with employees in these zip codes. This way we can normalize the loans to the number of employer businesses in the area, and we can calculate the average loan amounts per employee. The CBP doesn't include farms, so we add farms from the National Agricultural Statistical Service. We calculate minority share of the population at the zip code level, taking data from the census of population, and the minority share of employer businesses at the county level from the annual business survey. I will show purely descriptive results and also quadratic regressions weighted by population. Weighting doesn't really matter. If I don't do weighting, it looks very similar. So first, to show you some data, this is the distribution of PPP loans per business in different states. And you can see that in the early stages of the pandemic, Nevada and Florida were among the states receiving the highest number of loans per business. That's because of the importance of the hospitality business and tourism in these states, and businesses in these areas were hit among the hardest. Now I will show you a few diagrams that are all structured the same way. So on the horizontal axis, you have the minority share of the population in the zip code. So this is zip code level data. So the minority share goes from 0 to 95%. So minority doesn't mean it's a minority in the zip code. These are minorities in the US as a whole, so non-white and Latino, Latina business owners. And this is their share in different zip codes. And then on the vertical axis, you have the number of PPP loans per business in these areas during 2020. And here you can see this is overall, you can see a slight positive relationship. So zip code areas with larger minority shares received a higher number of PPP loans per business, although this is not a very strong relationship. Now, if we distinguish between the first and the second round of the PPP, we find striking differences. During the first round, which ran from April 3rd to April 16th, we have a strong negative relationship between the minority share of the population and the number of PPP loans per business. So in the first round, the money flowed predominantly to non-minority dominated communities. Only in the second round, the funds were dispersed more to minority communities. Now we find a positive relationship. So minority businesses took longer to get access to the funds, and I will discuss this at the end. I will discuss possible reasons at the end of this presentation. First, I'll show some more results. You could ask me, well, here we have minority share of the population. If you have a zip code with a high minority share of the population, that doesn't necessarily mean that the businesses there are also run by minorities, right? So here, to check whether this makes a difference, we calculate PPP loans per business by minority share of businesses. This is only available at the county level, and this is for both rounds combined, and we again find a positive relationship. So this is similar to using minority share of the population. So far, we've looked at the number of loans per business. Now we're looking at loan amounts per employee. This is combining both rounds, again at the zip code level, using minority share of the population, and we find a slight negative relationship. So overall, amounts flowed more to non-minority communities per employee than to minority communities. This was all the PPP program, the biggest program, the IDLE program. I will show you data for the IDLE program, and this was dispersed more to minority communities. So this is for 2020, and we find a clear positive relationship of IDLE loans per business and the minority share of the population at the zip code level. These were IDLE loans. Now IDLE advances, they are grants that don't need to be repaid. Again, we find a positive relationship of IDLE advances per business with the minority share of the population. For loan amounts, IDLE loan amounts in US dollars per employee, there's not much of a relationship with the minority share of the population. It's pretty flat, but maybe still slightly increasing with the minority share. So to summarize and then also discuss the results, we are using administrative data on the universe of all 2020 Paycheck Protection Program loans and IDLE loans and IDLE advances. We find that PPP loan receipts for business were overall positively related to minority share when we take both rounds together. But we find that there's a strong negative relationship in the first PPP round and a positive in the second. So what are potential reasons? So there have appeared other papers that present more anecdotal evidence and discuss potential reasons for that. So the first is in the first round, lenders, borrowers, business owners who had a established relationship with the bank were faster to be served and got these loans quicker. Minority business owners have less often these relationships with banks, so it took them longer. Second, community banks in rural areas were very nimble apparently and quickly used this program. They had often experience with working with the Small Business Administration and similar programs, and these rural areas are predominantly white. Third, small businesses, it was more difficult and took longer for small businesses to complete the necessary paperwork. Larger businesses had accountants who were experienced with this kind of work, and minority businesses are overrepresented among small businesses. And last not least, fintech seems to play a role. So fintech came in later. The SBA approved fintech only later. And apparently a lot of minority business owners, especially those who don't have these established relationships with banks, they use these fintechs a lot. So this helped really to disperse the funds to minority communities. And this is all about loan numbers. So loan amounts, we find that there's a negative relationship with the minority share of the population. So the amounts flowed more to non-minority communities. Just to conclude, a little outlook. So after we finished data collection at the end of 2020, there have been new rounds of the Paycheck Protection Program. The Economic Aid Act was signed into law in December 2020 and reopened the program. And then in March 2021, the PPP was extended again. And the government has tried and Congress have tried to increase equitable access to these programs for underserved businesses. So what did they do? They set aside funds for community financial institutions and credit unions. And they also provided a couple of days of a head start. So loans could only be applied to via community financial institutions during this time. In addition, in February 2021, President Biden announced a 40-day exclusive PPP application period for businesses with less than 20 employees. Again, this minority businesses are overrepresented among the small businesses. And the SBA has also organized informational webinars, for example, in the context of Black History Month, to reach out to Black business owners. Of course, we need further research to find whether these measures are effective in reaching minority business owners. So ideally, of course, we would also like to know how successful were these programs. So we hope that we will be able to link our loan level data to microdata on business sales, employment, and closures to find what effects these programs had on business outcomes. So hopefully we can get microdata for California. We're working on that to be allowed to link these data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Let's introduce our next speaker, Agnieszka from SKH Warsaw. Thank you very much. And I was just thinking of our last our trip to SKH Warsaw. That would have been fall 19. I was part of the contingent, and it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it obviously has been. So the floor is yours. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Kai. Okay, I will try to. Okay, it's how I did it before. Share screen. Okay.
Good. Here we go.
One moment. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the title of my presentation is the cooperation between science and business in the perspective of the ecosystem of Polish startups and especially the techno-science parks. I did this research. Generally, doing this research was my idea, but I managed to realize I would say the very beginning, because I hope that this research will last a little bit longer. But the introductory phase I've conducted with the help of Hanna Rachoń. Let me start with a very, very obvious economic truth that, of course, the scientific and technological progress, which results from the innovations and innovations and technological inventions, is not only a significant factor, but I really think that it is really essential or evident. Inevitable factor for building the competitiveness of every country and implicitly the economical progress of not only every country but the whole world. Very important issue in this broad let's say matter or idea is so-called knowledge transfer, which is the result of the cooperation between science and business. why this problem is so important. This is a very important problem, but why it is especially important also for Poland. Generally, Poland has a quite poor performance in many indicators covering the level of the innovativeness of our economy. For example, we have a very poor Poland has a poor performance or low indicators comparing to especially other European Union countries, with in such indicators like the number of inventions or patent applications, both per capita and also to in relation to GDP. Thus we have quite weak position, and that is why this the issue of merging the business and science in building, in helping, or in supporting the technological progress and international competitive of Poland was noticed and supported by policymakers and by the deciders. Also, as one of the ways to break out of the middle income or middle development trap. This idea of supporting and promoting the cooperation between business, between enterprises or the enterprises and Polish scientific institutions was noticed and underlined in many strategic documents, like the Country Development Strategy 2020, Long-Term National Development Plan, and also the document for the responsibility development. What I mean under that is why I got interest. I wanted to see how it works in reality, how works it, because we are talking so a lot about this problem. So how it works and why so badly. What are the what I understand under the institutions or scientific institutions, or the institutions of knowledge or knowledge-based institution in Poland. So in Poland there are the universities of other higher education institutions and their subordinate units like faculties, institutes, chairs, research centers, research institutes, but also the individual scientists and group of researchers, or teams of researchers. I decided to talk or to treat this problem from two angles, because I wanted to see how it looks like from the perspective of the firms, of the companies, and in this field I concentrated on startups, and I wanted to see how it looks like from the perspective of the business environment or the business ecosystem. And in the business ecosystem, in this part of the issue, I decided to start researching the so-called Polish technology parks or technology science parks, which are the special entities created especially to support the transfer of knowledge between science and business. And this is, as I mentioned, I would say the introductory or the first part, the first sequence or the first part of the planned research, which is meant to be quite more broadly. And in this framework, I would like to also to see how it is, when I look into another parts of the business ecosystem. But as I'm talking, I just started with startups and business and the Polish technology parks. the issues which I research is the what is the institutional environment that supports knowledge transfers from science to business in Poland, including, and then I presented the so-called business environment institutions, and also with a special attention put to definition and short characteristic of the technology park. And then I wanted to identify the main barriers and problems that this cooperation encounters in Poland. Of course, there was a need to gather, to have some data, to research, and I would like to refer to what Kai told us about the data. The data are really usually a big problem for the researcher, for the scientist, because in many cases you don't have the data. You don't have the data or some external databases, and the lack of the needed data were also in this. There are no official data on startups and also on the technology parks. That is why what I had to do. I prepared the questionnaire. I prepared the survey, but this kind of data or this kind of method is used also quite commonly in national reports, like for example the startup ecosystem report was sourced of the startup owners, and also it is also the case in the Polish reports, like for example the Polskie Startupy, prepared by one of the foundations, and also PARP also use service. Okay, generally how the business ecosystem in Poland look like. So we have the companies, we have public institutions like local, governmental, etc. Here you can see it, and what was the most interesting for me, as I mentioned, the business environment institutions, especially which involve entrepreneurship centers, innovation centers, technological parks, entrepreneurial incubators, centers of the technology transfer, and as I told you, technological parks. I decided to research first. So there were two surveys. The first survey was about the cooperation of Polish startups with knowledge-based institutions. It was the empirical analysis, and and also so how the cooperation looks like, and then the research also covered or the study covered also the impact of the COVID-19 on the activities of startups. Regardless of the form of collaboration, and most startups, they appreciate the benefits of engaging scientists into their activities, and about 70% business science collaboration, according to the entrepreneurs, the startup owners or startup entrepreneurs, has contributed to better performance of their business, and according to 60%, it was necessary this collaboration or this cooperation with knowledge institutions or the scientists was necessary for the further development of their business. But 44 respondents they responded lack of any cooperation with the representatives of the scientific community. And here you have more detailed. We have because the presentation is really long. That is why I will skip a lot of slides. But for example, and what I want to underline are the causes or barriers for this cooperation. So why, what is wrong? What is the problem? For example, here you can see the causes according to the entrepreneurs. What are the causes of the lack of this cooperation with the scientists? And not expected business benefits in 33% in the industry of the company. This cooperation is not justified. There is no chance to be realized. So here, if you can see in more details. But what is very important is that none of the surveyed startups point to the unavailability of the suitable sources or funding sources for possible cooperation with science. That is why the lack of there are not systemic barriers. So. The lack of the funding is not the reason for not taking up this cooperation, and it is, I would say, quite good news for let's say for the solutions or for the policy run in Poland. What is it is also very visible that in most cases entrepreneurs decide for informal cooperation, so informal ways, like it is about 67%. And what are the forms? Primarily consulting with educators, attending meetings and workshops, and so on. And only very small percentage, 4%, they use the formal and the forms of the formalities, the formal cooperation, like on the basis of a contract agreement, participation in the formal project or program financed by the state, for example, dedicated to the startups. More than about 40%, they indicate both formal and informal types of the cooperation. Okay, the startups also work more often with individual scientists from which, let's say, which they know from their by them for who can help to solve a given problem. So it means it shows again a very high importance of the group creativity and this interpersonal relations versus formal activities when we look at when we take the perspective of the startups. So I think it is one it is very another reason, reflecting very well, the startups. So they are mainly the young people who highlight the interpersonal relations and the creativity, not the formal and really very, let's say, the strict forms of the cooperation. Also, it is very important in the human capital in projects with researchers. So 88% of the respondents base the cooperation on the human capital. So on the interpersonal or the relations, and rather not. It shows that the soft aspects of this cooperation is much more important for startups, not this hard, let's say, aspects. The hard aspects, I mean, using of the infrastructure in the framework of the agreement, or also we can observe low percentage of use of physical capital. For example, research infrastructure, laboratories, and other rooms for research, which is usually connected with signing the formal agreement. Because low formalization of the cooperation. And here we can see what kind of support from the representatives of the knowledge-based institutions is appreciated most by the startups. And assistant is developing business concept, working together, commercialization, and so on and so on. Okay. The impact of COVID-19. The impact of COVID-19. So, according to 36%, the epidemic and economic consequences like lockdowns especially have negatively impacted their companies. But good news is that for the rest of them, COVID-19 didn't had very harm or very severe negative impact on their business. As you can see, for example, what was also observable that there was a weaker negative impact of the pandemic on those startups that were already working with researchers before the pandemic. So it means that that possibly those startups are more, let's say, creative, and they are more immune from the negative impact of this pandemic shock, as they are generally more open for the collaboration, for the new ideas, and that is why they were not hit so badly, you know. They don't suffer so much the negative consequences of the COVID-19 economic impact. Entrepreneurs, for part of them, COVID-19 has inspired them to create a new product, service, or to conduct a joint analysis of the market situation of their company. And also during so they say, they maintain that 70% of them believe that the collaboration undertaken has contributed and continues to have an impact on the development of their company. I mean, the collaboration with of course, with the knowledge-based institutions, and around half of them say that this type of collaboration is needed for the future development of their startup. Okay, then I'll proceed to technology parks. As entities supporting cooperation of knowledge and business institutions in Poland, they were created as special entities to support this cooperation, and the transfer of knowledge between science institutions to business. And we managed to contact 26 of Polish technology parks out of 37 units performing this function. Yeah, so it is quite, I would say that this result is quite good, because and from those 26 contacted, the representatives of 23 responded to our questionnaire. Yeah, so it is 60% of the let's say the whole technoparks community. Okay, among them you can see the names of those who participated in our research, in our study. I mean, as a respondents. Okay. The most important. How much time do I have more?
If you can wrap up in the next minute or so, Agnieszka, that'd be very appreciated. Thank you.
Okay. So generally. So I would just I'll skip most of the slides, but generally, the respondents confirm the presence of the scientific institutions and also they are the number of the scientific units which are present in the location. And here because the survey was really long, it was about 30 questions. So, for example, it presented the division of knowledge institutions collaborating, I mean, in which science, I couldn't, sorry, I could, this is in Polish because I couldn't edit it, because it was done in this Google Forms, and it doesn't allow to edit it. That's why, sorry, it is in Polish, but okay. We could observe strict regional orientation of the technoparks activity because 100% of them responded that they, despite the possibilities created by the modern means of distance communication, they tend to cooperate with the units from their, let's say, vicinity or from this region. Yeah. Here you have a lot of detailed, answers. What is also very characteristic here, the rather formal cooperation is more, let's say, common, like in more than 70% of the cases. And also we gather the information on the ways or the forms of employing the representatives of the science institutions. Yeah, also provision of technical infrastructure. Okay, I will. What are the? But quickly about the lack of such cooperation. I mean, about the business and science. For example, some of them don't see it is beneficial to the operation of the science and technology park. It is difficult to reach the right people from scientific institutions. It is also they also mentioned the lack of the suitable source of funding for this cooperation. So we can see that still there are a lot of problems or the barriers which makes this collaboration and generally the activity of the technoparks in this field not easy. Yeah, so it weakens this, let's say, this mission of technoparks. Okay, we also asked about whether they help in organizing the common meetings or some workshops, with the participation of the people from business and the science and institutions, together, and you also get very interesting results. Okay, so I would just quickly get to the conclusion. So generally, in conclusion, it is worth noting that when asked about the possibilities about and possible recommendations, the implementation of which, in the opinion of the technoparks, would facilitate the activities of the companies, including startups, and encourage the entrepreneurs to work within the framework of technology park and in cooperation with the representatives of the scientific community. They suggest the specific improvements, like they mention tax exemptions for companies that cooperate directly with a given technology park or have their headquarters on its territory. They also recommended the tax exemptions from costs related to research projects or the preferential interest rates on loans for startups starting their business within technology park, as well as for the projects which are commonly realized by business and science institutions, representatives of business and knowledge-based institutions. They also mentioned some of them also mentioned the need for greater financial support for technology park and for this cooperation, which I mean, and also they think that it would be great to have a more professional assistance to business and scientists when in the process of commercialization of knowledge. Okay, as I told you, there are a lot of very interesting and detailed results of those surveys, and I hope to write and to put all of them in the article. Yeah, and
Agnieszka, thank you very much. We're at 10 o'clock.
Yeah, as you can see, a lot of you very much. Yeah, I also all the questions are welcome. So if you want to ask me about any of the
thank you so much again,
I covered, yeah. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Let me introduce Mark. Mark, you're next. Mark Packard. If you can share your slide and you can begin as our next presenter. Thank you very much. Thank you, Agnieszka. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
All right, can you hear me okay? And then you see the slides. Okay, this is a project that I'm working on with a colleague of mine at Oklahoma State University, and it is going to be different than some of these other presentations. This is more philosophical, and it kind of engages an ongoing discussion and debate in the field of entrepreneurship regarding the role of rationality and irrationality in the process of entrepreneurship. This is a debate that I've been participating in, and there's a special issue in one of our top journals, the Journal of Business Venturing, that this paper is targeted for on that subject of rationality. So let me move on here. So to describe the debate briefly, there's a lot of recent research that looks at a very interesting phenomenon where entrepreneurs are kind of arising out of impulsiveness. So, you point to Richard Branson, for example, their ideas, their entrepreneurial intentions arose kind of as spontaneity, as kind of, they didn't have intentions to be entrepreneurs. It just kind of happened. It fell in their lap, in essence. And in part, that's because of their personality, their impulsive personalities. And in particular, recent research has looked at ADHD as a possible kind of cause of this impulsivity, driving people to kind of spontaneously just go for it, with little regard to the well-known costs and risks of entrepreneurship, right? We're just going to go for it and see what happens, damn the consequences, right? We'll see. Which is super interesting, right? So basically this view is looking at the irrational origination of entrepreneurship, and that's basically kind of that irrationality component is what's at issue here, because there's an alternative perspective, the judgment-based view, which is espoused by Nikolai Foss and Peter Klein, among various others, that sees this impulsivity from a different frame of reference, from a subjectivist frame of reference. And pointing to my own definition of entrepreneurship here, entrepreneurship is the intentional pursuit of new economic value. There is no irrational entrepreneurship. There is no unintentional entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurship starts when you turn your intentions to value pursuits. That impulsivity is kind of a short-termism, a high time preference, but it's not irrational. It's we're pursuing our own subjective ends. We're just, kind of winging it in terms of what those ends should be. And so this is kind of a different view, but I want to dig into this a little bit more and make this case. And again, in response to this judgment-based view, the traditionalist, the objectivist response is impulsivity is the opposite of rationality. That's how we understand that word, right? Impulsivity is not deliberate. It's not thinking things through. It's just reacting. And so this is the tension that we're addressing in this, right? So how should we understand rationality? This is kind of this graphic is kind of the common view, right? We've got our deliberate system 2 way of thinking versus our system 1 instinctive way of thinking, and they're at tension. And rationality is system 2 deliberation, and irrationality is the emotional, reactive, impulsive view. But there's actually a profound debate underscoring this whole discussion that a lot of modern scholars kind of take for granted or don't really know the history of it. And so we're digging into that history a little bit and resurrecting it to discuss this topic, this debate, and address it. And this debate is between the objectivist and the subjectivist views, right? So positivism versus anti-positivism. And these are kind of very broad categories, and they encompass a lot of different things. Positivism is often now referred to as realism, and there's a bunch of different variants of this. But to kind of fly through this a little bit, positivism is the standard view. It's a social scientific philosophy of science that basically treats social science the same as natural science. We're pursuing it through the same methodology, right? We're collecting data. We are trying to unpack the natural and social causes of social phenomena, right? So I've got this quote from Condorcet, who was one of the early espousers of this view, right? The only foundation for the knowledge of the natural sciences is the idea that the general laws, known or unknown, which regulate the phenomena of the universe are necessary and constant. And why should that principle be less true for the intellectual and moral faculties of man than for the other actions of nature, right? So social science, natural science, it's all science. So we're trying to understand human phenomena, social phenomena through this same kind of scientific method. Saint Simon was an very early advocate for this. Comte and Carnap, more recent, and kind of Carnap in particular very much shaped this becoming the dominant view in today's social science. So from this perspective, how do we understand rationality? Well, you know, we're looking at outcomes as through this lens of optimality. We can optimize our economic choices based on the resources and intentions and demands, values that we currently have. And so there is a right and wrong. There is an optimal and suboptimal, right? So we end up with Homo economicus early on, this perfectly rational economic actor, and we can try to figure out how, well, understanding economic agents as Homo economicus, we can optimize kind of the system. And then we got, you know, Herbert Simon's bounded rationality concept, which kind of has become more prevalent in economic thinking, where that optimal choice is bounded by what we perceive, what we can perceive and know at any moment, right? We can't basically assume that the individual actor is omniscient and can optimize on all available knowledge, because we don't have all of that. And so we're boundedly rational. We have just basically a subset of all total knowledge, and we optimize based on that bounded knowledge. So that's basically the current thinking on rationality. And I know that's kind of a bit simplistic. I'm flying through this a little bit, but but that's the current thinking. Now let's contrast this with what is called anti-positivism, the subjectivist alternative to this. And this is not super popular in economics and most of social science. It is the dominant view in sociology. And so we can see kind of sociology and, economic psychology doing their research programs very differently. And it's because of these foundational differences. And so the anti-positive view is basically that social science is an altogether different beast from natural science. We're dealing with human actors, which are thinking and intentional. If you're a physicist studying the falling of a rock, that rock doesn't have intentions. It doesn't get to choose what it does. It is completely reactive. The forces happen on it. It is not a force in itself. There's a quip from, I believe it was Ludwig von Mises, is basically, you throw a stick into a pond, it sinks or floats based on the laws of nature. You throw a person into the pond, they get to choose whether they sink or swim. And so that's kind of the thinking, the argument of the anti-positivist movement. In economics, this anti-positive movement was manifest in the Austrian School of Economics, and Frank Knight was a staunch anti-positivist. But the dominant movement in economics and social science ended up with positivism. But in terms of subjectivism, how do we understand rationality? And it's very different from how the objectivists see rationality. This is a quote from Ludwig von Mises. Human action is necessarily always rational. The term rational action is therefore pleonastic, which means redundant or tautological, and must be rejected as such. When applied to the ultimate ends of action, the terms rational and irrational are inappropriate and meaningless. The ultimate ends of action is always the satisfaction of some desires of the acting man. Since nobody is in a position to substitute his own value judgments for those of the acting individual, it's vain to pass judgment on other people's aims and volitions. No man is qualified to declare what would make another man happier or less discontented. In other words, this idea of rationality is basically saying, as an external observer, as a scientific observer, you're doing it wrong. But can you know that? Can you ever possibly know that? Let me skip that one. There's some recent research by Jan Koenderink, along with Teppo Fellin and Kruger and some others, that argue that this positivist view, this rationality view, presumes what they call an all-seeing eye. It's the Laplacian demon, or the Archimedean point, where you can see and know everything at once. There's an omniscience. And so rationality presumes omniscience of what people want or should want. Even the Simon's bounded rationality, any presumption of rationality has this kind of assumption that in any moment there is an objective, this is what is intended. But the problem with that is, again, well, from the subjectivist view, that isn't for anyone to observe. That can't be observed. It is for each of us to determine our own intentions, our ends. And if that's the case, our intentions are dynamic. We change our intentions all the time. And in any moment, that can switch in an instant, right? Again, that's that impulsivity thing. We can change what we want. And because of that, we're arguing, I know we've got 15 minutes left, so I'm gonna wrap this up real fast.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. That we want to move toward this subjectivism. This is the argument. And this is going to be a contentious point, but you know, the pet rock, how did that become valuable? It's so fascinating. Objectively, there's no value there. It's just a rock. But the subjectivist view is that things become valuable by the way we shape our intentions, we rethink of and reframe reality around us. So people choose entrepreneurship for a lot of reasons. It's not profits. It's not monetary profits, right? Only. We like money, but money is a means to an end. There is no accidental entrepreneurship. Impulsive is rational. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. I'd like to introduce Marta, Rafał, and Albert as our next set of presenters. Good to see you all. Thank you very much. If you can upload your slides and
okay, I'm gonna share my screen, but the slides are presentation is our.
Thank you.
It's working. Great, thank you. Okay. So can we start? Yes. Okay. Well, as we are free, we decided to allocate a role, and I have the honor to be the first in the presentation. So, guys, nice to meet you. Good morning and good afternoon for us in this time zone. Well, to be honest, we decided to make a small creative switch, and instead of the presentation of the report, which will be available in the publication after the conference, we decided to tell you more about two additional researches we are concluding now in SGH. Why two? Because I'm going to tell you something about the responsible customer research, then Marta will tell you about work goes home research, and Albert will tell you about Canvas business model research. Okay. So for research project, and we are ready. We would be really glad to invite you to cooperate with us if you find something interesting in this project. Okay, may I ask you to move to the next slide? Okay, first project, this is behavior of young customer. We are already established, we already built research place. This is questionnaire, and we already finished first round of researches. We are trying to understand what does it mean to be, may I ask you to move to the next slide, please? Oh, perfect, thank you. What does it mean for contemporary young customer to be responsible? And we are analyzing this aspect, we're analyzing this issue from 6 points of view, as you can see here, but also we are collecting some personal data which can help us to build some statistic analysis. And I'm pretty sure that this presentation will be available afterwards, and if you are interested in joining us in this particular project, we'll be glad. But also I'm glad to invite Marta to tell you something more about our research about what goes home. Marta, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Rafał. Good evening, everyone. Good morning for you. So the next project is Work Goes Home. The situation with the pandemic and with the COVID-19 inspired us to go deeper in this remote work issues, because in Poland we are not familiar as much as in US with working from home or remote work. Even for the managers and the companies, it was the new reality. The background of this research was about our SENS course, Creative Problem Solving and Design Thinking, with Professor Rafał Kasprzak, and we gathered the data on the impact of COVID-19 on how and where people are working during the pandemic, what impact this will have for the future of work and the workplace, I mean, if you will be working at home or in the offices, and what are the priorities to optimize the work from home experience from the point of view of the employees and employers as well. How will the crisis change how and where people work in the future? So we are just, I think, somewhere in the middle of this in this research, because we have around 50 respondents from Poland. We did the online survey, and nowadays we want to go internationally with this research. So there are some insights from Poland. So the vast majority of respondents, they want to continue work remotely after the pandemic. They want to work at least 1 day per week remotely, and they prefer to stay at home 2-3 days per week. 15% they don't want to actually come back to the offices at all, because we found that the respondents they think that their motivation increased during the remote work, and also the productivity. 44% of people participating in the online meetings, they are not fully dressed. So we are now aware of it. People, they dressed like with t-shirts and shirts, but underneath there are different things under the desk. Thanks to the remote work, the society, of course, reduced some environment pollution, but also remote work gives employees greater job satisfaction and feeling of safety. Because during the pandemic in Poland, especially, people and the workers and employees, they very now conscious about the safety feelings and the safety of their health. And we want to also deepen our research to find out the form of a future workforce, workplace after the pandemic, what technologies can help improve the remote work, and also how this remote work changed the social corporate social responsibility policy in the companies, and what competences we should pass to our students and future managers, they can effectively manage the hybrid work. So in the future, we want to do the cross-country analysis to find out if the other countries' perspective is similar, or what are the differences between Poland and other countries, this post-pandemic perspective. Going to the end, if you want to join our research, please contact me or Rafał, and we will be glad to cooperate with you. Thank you, Albert, and now the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good evening. I'm gonna present you a project which was born in Reno. One of the ideas that we had during our visit to Reno almost 3 years ago. And it came to fruition, actually, because we've conducted a study. We've chosen creative industries, creative sectors, and we've asked ourselves a question: how people, entrepreneurs from these creative industries differ from, let's say, average entrepreneurs. And we created a method to measure that, basing on business model canvas. We kind of narrowed down the question to the business models operationalization. But the original idea was how these people in this creative industry are different in respect of being entrepreneurial. So we've gathered a sample of 130 companies, 65 of them from video game industry from Poland, and 65 from fashion and design sectors. It was all the details you will find in the publication in the paper, which will be published after this seminar, I believe, because it was prepared, so it should be published. I'm not gonna get much into the details, but I'm just going to show you the methodology and the results that we have. So we've gathered the sample, and we asked them to arrange elements of business models basing on the perception of the importance of these business models, and it was based on business model canvas, quite popular. I'm not going to explain that. I'm not going to discuss that. I don't think it's not only a matter of time that we are short now, but probably you are quite familiar with the idea. And the findings. Findings are that in the sample group, in the creative industries, the most important element of this business models was customer relationships. And generally speaking, elements associated with clients, channels, customer segments, value propositions were ranked higher than the others. The organizational elements, key activities, and key resources were indicated as relatively less important, and there was no significant differences between video games and design sectors. The scores in those two samples were very, very similar. So we have, I would say, a methodology which is tested, and the study is ready to be conducted on different sample groups. And I think it's a good idea to think about different samples, and maybe there is someone who would like to join us in this study, so we could gather more data based on the same questionnaire, which proved to be very, very useful. Okay, so this is all the contacts to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marta, Rafał, and Albert. Much appreciated. That concludes our presenters and presentations. Let's open it up to any questions, and Holly can assist with that as well if any questions from our audience also. Thank you. I have one question, but I'm going to wait. I'll let everyone go first.
I have a question for Mark. Yeah, that's interesting. So you could understand impulsivity as just a quickly changed objective, if I got that right, and it could still be rational. I wonder what's your reaction to tests of cognitive reflection. So there are tests that you ask a question that has an objectively right and an objectively wrong answer, like mathematically so. And then some people just go with the quick intuitive answer, which is wrong in these cases. And you can measure the time, so they take less time to think about it. And it has been shown in research that people who tend to make these impulsive answers that are wrong in this test, at least, they are more likely to be entrepreneurs. So how does that fit into your framework?
That's a good question. So the problem with experiments like that, and a lot of behavioral economics from the subjectivist view, is that we don't really understand what their intentions are in the experiment. Like the impulsive person that just answers as quickly as possible, what are they doing? Why are they doing it that way? Why are they not thinking through and trying to get the right answer? It's very likely, for example, I don't know, if I was doing that experiment, I just want to get that out of there as fast as possible. And so I'm just kind of, so it's hard to really kind of infer the intentions of each of those participants. When we try to give them an explicit intention, like in game theory, that can work, but that only gets us as far as understanding how they work in terms of that intention. But when you let them choose their own intentions, in reality, it could be very different. So the generalizability of game theory is suspect in a lot of ways. And so I think it is very possible that impulsive people and impulsive personalities tend to be more entrepreneurial. But that isn't to say that they're necessarily irrational from our perspective. It's just, it's a different way of thinking of what rationality is, I guess. So I don't know if that answers your question well enough, but we can talk some more about it.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also saw we had a hand raise in the audience. Cal, I don't know if you saw that. Avery, I think might be your name. Did you still have a question?
Yes, I would like. Yeah, I don't know how to find the. Okay, may I? May I ask?
Sorry, yeah, I think there's a question from the audience.
Yeah.
There
I
was,
think I saw a hand go up and then it disappeared here on my screen, but.
Avery, do you still have a question?
Yeah,
Yes.
I.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. I have a question to Frank Fossen. Because I'm curious about the whole program of this anti-crisis or combating the negative impact of the crisis or the lockdown or business in United States. And I don't know whether I have understood well, but you mentioned that the banks were also they also engaged into this program, and my question is whether there was some abolition of payment of the loans, or in which way, or they have prolonged paying the rates on the loans, or in which way they participated. How to what extent they have alleviated the situation of the business, whether they, for example, said, no, you don't need to pay the rates, or you don't need to pay the loans we have, or the credits we have given. And the second question is about how the government and how the authorities how they performed, because in Poland we also had so-called anti-crisis shield, and it was of course said to be perfect and perfect help for the businessman. But what as usually in Poland, or very often in Poland, it was very, very problematic, because most of the business, or most companies, they said they had to wait too long for this help from the government, and they didn't get this help on time, and for all those payments were not enough to cover their their losses. So how it was in United States generally, or in Nevada, I don't know how it was, whether it was distributed on the federal level, or because a lot of solutions, there are a lot of solutions you have mentioned in your presentation.
Go ahead, Frank.
Yes. So to your first question, thanks for asking. I didn't explain this in my presentation. So the programs, both the PPP and the IDA programs, are federal government programs, and they're administered by the Small Business Administration, which is a federal government agency nationwide in the US. And it's just then channeled through private banks. So they, the money comes from the federal government. It's tax money. Just the banks receive the loan application and process that, and then pass that on to the SBA. So there's no risk for the banks here.
Yeah, so simply the money from the government to cover, let's say, those the payments of the loans which were not able to be paid by the businessmen because they were locked or shut down.
I think what you're referring to would be a loan guarantee. That's a different program that is also available from the SBA, and not only during the pandemic, but during the pandemic, these specific programs are directly from the federal government. So there's no bank money involved. The bank gets some fees for processing it, so the banks are really only processing it, the private banks.
Everybody, I just want to be mindful of time as well. It's 10:35. We're in our half-an-hour break period before the 11 o'clock AM PST sessions start over here. So I just like to be mindful of everyone's time as well if anyone needs to take a break. So we'll wrap up here in the next minute or two. We can take one more question as well.
Yeah, I think Avery, if you'd still like to ask the question.
Yes, okay, so this is for Dr. Packard. So coming from like Plato's view of emotive poetics, creativity is more focused on impulsive emotion and imagination that kind of diverts from rationality. Could impulsivity in business be seen as a creative characteristic rather than a rational one?
Yeah, I mean, again, from a subjectivist view, we don't see rationality being kind of, we don't see in terms of rationality versus irrationality, but I think you're right that in terms of a kind of those types of personalities that do think short term and are more impulsive, do switch their preferences and intentions very quickly. They also do tend to be more creative, and so and try new things, and maybe that's kind of a learning process, right? When you are more impulsive and do more things, you tend to get more different types of experiences, and so that may have a kind of a causal effect. It's a good question. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your question as well, Avery. I want to thank everyone for attending session 1, Global Entrepreneurship. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Great to see many familiar faces once again. And this concludes the session. Again, at 11 a.m. Is our next round of sessions. Hopefully you have a short time here for a little bit of a break, and see you around the corner. Again, thank you very much, everyone.
See you. Bye-bye.
Be safe. Thank you.